What's going on, everybody, and welcome to the third Wheel of Time diary for the Dragon Reborn, making this in total, I believe, my 12th diary. And this is actually kind of a little bit surprising. The last book took 4 diaries, the first book took 5 diaries, the second book took 4, this book only took 3. Granted, part of that was because of other circumstances happening this month that allowed me to and encouraged me to plow through the book, so I am done with this over a week early. In fact, today I am recording this on Wednesday like normal, but I actually finished the book on Sunday. I let it marinate a little bit before I ended up recording on Sunday, but then Monday I didn't have time to record anything, and last night I didn't have time to record because I appeared on a live stream with Chris Verrocchio. If you want to go watch that, I will probably have it linked, and if I don't, then I will have his channel linked, either or maybe both, who knows. But yeah, I am back on the Wheel of Time train, and this time I'm going to say with confidence, I'm fully on board. I'm in for the long haul after this book. I had a great, fantastic time, again, an easy 5 stars. And you will see that, you know, just kind of generally speaking, because I'm going to save part of my commentary for my review, which will come out here in a few weeks. I'm not exactly certain on the date quite yet, but it will be in just a few weeks from now, maybe just a couple weeks. Next week, I'm going to do a both spoiler and spoiler-free and spoiler-filled sort of discussion on the first trilogy, so to speak, of the Wheel of Time, to kind of make up for the diary that would have happened next week, but obviously can't because I'm not currently reading the book at this moment. Either way, that is what it is looking like. Like I said, I'm going to save a little bit of my commentary for the reviews so that I'm not rehashing all of the same points every single time I talk about the book. Some of those points I'll probably talk about next week anyway. Who knows? It'll be difficult to differentiate between the 3 times that I discussed the book. But regardless, I had a fantastic time. This book ended and I was just super high on it, and I currently still am. Even a few days later, I'm thinking about it, and I think I do still really enjoy it. And, you know, despite the things that I had reservations about up to this point in the series, at least, because I know there's a lot more to maybe be a little worried about in books like 8 and 9 and 10 in particular, those 3 books, potentially 7, potentially 11, depending on who you ask. But just generally speaking, the way that I felt about these 3 books so far has me very excited to continue, and I think the series is, for me, like I said, easy 5 stars for what I read this past week, which was chapters 37 through 56, so nearly 20 chapters, or was that exactly 20 chapters? It might have been exactly 20 chapters if that is how math works. And I loved it. I read for a little over 8 hours this week, pretty much the same amount of time that I read this week as the first week, so, you know, pretty good amount in total. I got 24, somewhere between 24 and 24 and a half hours of reading for The Dragon Reborn, which was significant amount shorter than The Great Hunt, which was a little over 28 hours, which was itself quite a bit shorter than Eye of the World, which was like 33 hours of reading. But with that being said, I've kind of already tipped my head on a lot of the spoiler-free material. I just think that a lot of what this book did and what I read the past week, I guess I'll say, well, probably more like, yeah, I guess over the last week works, because I had recorded that other diary on Monday, and then I was reading on Tuesday through Sunday, and that was the end of my reading. What Jordan was doing with this book is a very interesting thing to think about, all things considered, for a couple of different reasons. One of those reasons being POV allocation. I believe I briefly discussed this last week as well, with certain POV who is more or less off the page isn't a POV in this book that you would expect to be for a couple of different reasons, and isn't. But I think that what Jordan was doing instead worked just as well, if not a little bit better. Now, I had gone into this book assuming that that character wouldn't be a POV, but it wasn't quite the way that I was expecting for that to be the case. But what it ultimately came down to is that character ended up just being the linchpin for everything else, and where everybody else was going and what everybody else was doing, rather than being a POV making his own decisions, you know, in and of himself. And I think that worked perfectly fine for what the story was doing. In fact, I would say it was a rather satisfying execution of what Jordan was trying to do, even if, you know, I could see people maybe being a little bit underwhelmed by the Dragon Reborn, but I genuinely really enjoyed it, even compared to the Great Hunt and Eye of the World, which Eye of the World I was pleasantly surprised by. The Great Hunt was the step up that everybody said it was, but I have a special place in my heart for Eye of the World already. I just really feel good about that one. But this one has definitely sold this series for me. Like I said, I'm in it for the long haul, regardless of what books 7 through 11 do to me, plus the prequel, I suppose. But either way, yeah, that is what I'm going to talk about in terms of the spoiler free. Let's get into the spoiler filled and actually talk about some of the things that happen. And probably going to be a little bit rough this time around because it has been a few days since I finished the book, so some of the details I'm definitely forgotten already, and trying to remember where I started this week versus where I ended last time might be a little bit difficult as well. So I've actually just kind of been sitting here for a few minutes trying to decide how I'm going to talk about what I read this past week. And surprisingly enough, I think I can just go about it in terms of the POVs and which perspectives actually occurred and what happened in them up to a certain point where some things start to come together in the actual climax, instead of just jumping from POV to POV, chapter to chapter, because in this latter portion of the book, this last third especially, the POV allocation gets a little bit shorter and Jordan jumps around a little bit more often, as opposed to, say, the first 90 pages, which were Perrin outside of the prologue, and then the next 220 pages, which were just Egwene almost entirely, except for like 2 chapters that weren't Egwene, and then a couple periods of 2 chapters that were Matt. So a little bit of Matt near the end of that period, but generally speaking, the first 2/3 of this book was a lot of like one POV at a time, and they lasted a long time. But starting off with what I read, starting in chapter 37, Fires in Carrion, we have journeyings of Nynaeve and Elaine and Egwene, who have now left the White Tower in Tarvalon, basically to go to Tear, like what, the items that they found in that storeroom in Tarvalon held, which basically suggested that that's where they were going, and some other stuff that suggested that that might be where Rand was going. So the girls are headed that direction, so they're kind of like passing by Carrion. And one of the things that I've appreciated about this latter act, this last act of the book, as well, is Robert Jordan has used a little bit more of the Aiel within the story. We've kind of had hints of this kind of stuff previously, especially in the Great Hunt, both with Rand looking like and basically being an Aielman who wasn't raised with the rest of the Aiel, and the fact that I forget exactly who it was. It was Matt and some other people when they were going after Rand while they were searching for the horn the first time around in the Great Hunt. They met Nioman in the mountains that was saying we're searching for he who comes before, or whatever his name was. Basically their own prophecies for Rand, for the Dragon Reborn. And one of the things that I found interesting about this last act, like I said, is that Jordan actually uses some Aiel in some places, and one of these places is with the girls traveling towards Tyr. And sorry, now that I'm just remembering, the city is called Tyr, not Tear. It's not my fault that Robert Jordan used a word to name the city after that has 2 different pronunciations, and half of the things that you look for pronunciations in the back of these books don't have pronunciations for some reason, depending on what they are, if they're in the glossary at all. So that's my bad for mispronouncing Tyr as terror all this time. So if I do that on accident moving forward still, I apologize for that. I'm going to try to make a point to say Tyr, but with my accent it probably still sounds like terror anyway. I never realized how much of an accent I had until doing these diaries, actually, where I'm having to say a bunch of names when I'm like, man, I pronounce these things weird. But either way, the girls are heading towards Tyr, and they do come across some Aiel, and sort of the destruction that has been happening in Carrion. I forget exactly what has been prompting it. I think some of it is Civil War related to a degree. I might be misremembering that, but plenty of Carrion and people are, taking refuge in Andor, and kind of there's this river that sort of splits the 2 of them, and that's where these girls are heading down in a ship towards Tyr, and that's where they're going. But they do meet some Aiel. They're captured by whoever it was. I forget already who they were captured by. What was it? I don't even have it noted down exactly who they're captured by, but the girls do get captured by someone or something for whatever reason. They might have just been normal dark friends, but I forget exactly what they were doing. Either way, they were saved by these Aiel people that they were, you know, tracking, and sort of got ambushed by as well. It's just like, oh, there's these people now, and you know, they freed them from a sort of captivity. So, you know, it was an important meeting just in terms of knowing who these Aiel are, and that they are characters in the story, and that they sort of will be important in the book moving forward, including meeting a new character specifically named Avienda, I believe her name is, which based off of, you know, random things that I've heard here and there, I think is a fan favorite character. So it was rather exciting to get to meet her and several of the other Aiel people. But then you also have other moments of, you know, Nynaeve and Egwene kind of showing off their magical prowess. It's really interesting to have these characters who started off in Eye of the World, you know, more or less helpless. Nynaeve was obviously the wisdom, so she kind of, you know, had some sort of touch, some sort of connection with the one power to some degree, but we've kind of learned that part of her abilities are sort of connected with her quickness to anger. When she gets angry at stuff, that's when she's able to touch it reliably and just surge with the power, which I think is both a cool mechanic, so to speak, with the magic, but also a little bit in a way, because it also kind of makes it a little bit too easy to use gimmicky or deus ex machina moments that just kind of like, oh, Nynaeve's angry because of this, now she's just going to do whatever, and she doesn't have control over it because she doesn't have great control over magic. It's just when she's angry kind of thing. So like, there's a little bit of a give and take there, but I have appreciated that Jordan hasn't been relying too much on just using Nynaeve to be like, okay, she's just going to do this thing that's crazy because she's mad. And only once or twice has that really happened up to this point, and a lot of that was definitely, usually quite, you know, usually it made sense. But there were also times when it didn't make as much sense, or where it felt a little bit more contrived. But moving forward with their storyline, let's see if I can find the next chapter of them here. I believe the next time that we actually get to see these characters in the book, I might have skipped a chapter of a POV of them earlier, in which case I apologize, but if that's the case, then what happened definitely wasn't important enough for me to have immediately recalled that happened in between. But the next time that we see them together is when they are actually arriving in Tyr several chapters later in the book, at around chapter 48. And what they're kind of doing is they're there, and Egwene essentially has this dream that's like, okay, well, this happens a little bit later in the chapter when they've already found a place, but Nynaeve manages to sniff out essentially another wisdom, a wise woman, as I believe the people in Tyr were calling her, in the city, and they reside there. So instead of going to any inns where they're going to be, you know, probably looked for by the Black Aja Aes Sedai, who they themselves are trying to follow, they stop at this other place, and there Egwene decides to travel to Tel'aran'rhiod again using her ter'angreal ring. And in this dream specifically, it was an interesting moment because she met the 13 Black Aja in the, what is it, the Heart of the Stone, I believe it was called, at Tyr, where Kalendor resides. Basically the place that Rand is heading to. So Egwene sees this in her dreams, where she's transported there and is met by the Black Aja. So now the Black Aja know that they are in Tyr and probably know their location. As we actually discover later, there is, you know, a little bit going on with some storms, and the storms, you know, kind of play like a tangentially related plot point in the plot of the story, but, you know, nothing horribly important. But yeah, Egwene's dream is definitely like the biggest thing that happens here, meeting the Black Aja in the Heart of the Stone, but also afterwards, because I believe the next scene after that is actually a Nynaeve POV rather than an Egwene POV. So there are a couple Nynaeve POVs here, and they were chosen rather intentionally. This next Nynaeve POV is when she's trying to go out and get food for the girls, and when she returns, it turns out the Black Aja have been there, and they've basically, you know, trapped the wise woman who they're staying with. I forget her name off the top of my head. Mother somebody. Mother Guerra, I think her name is. That might be it. But they find that she is basically pinned down where she is sitting with the power of air. So something that, you know, the girls were learning in Tar Valon early in this book, I think, or maybe they were, you know, sort of messing around with it a little bit in the last book. I don't remember for sure. some things depending on the location are kind of running together for that reason. But they found Mother Guerra there, and Egwene and Elaine had already been found and attacked and captured essentially by the Black Aja, and then Nynaeve joins them in the capture. They are essentially bait for some of the other characters, as they are told by the Black Aja themselves. But then moving forward into there, they are captured, like I said, and they are taken straight to a prison within the Heart of the Stone. So they are in that location, and that's where we're going to stop with the storyline. For now, that's where they are, trying to get into dreams and trying to escape through any means that they possibly can. But that's where they are at the end of their storyline, basically up to the climax. The next storyline to talk about is a little bit more of Matt's storyline, his misadventures with Tom, going from in, town to down, firstly trying to get a letter from Elaine to what's her name, Queen Morghast in Caemlyn and Andor. So Queen Morghast, and I found this familiar location to actually be really fun to be in with Matt. Like I said, partially it was more fun because it was Matt, so it was a new set of eyes compared to Rand from the first book when they passed through. But it was also still fresh because a lot of Matt's memories kind of messy and not like fully there from the first book because of his experience being a little bit too tied to the dagger. So it was simultaneously fresh and not. And we also have a lot more, like, is thematic the right word? I don't know if thematic is the right word, but there's a lot more stuff explored with Matt's luck specifically, because Matt has a proclivity towards gambling, specifically with dice. There's a lot of stuff that happens here. So they basically finally make it to Caemlyn, and Matt is somehow able to... They stop at the same inn that the group stopped at in the first book, and I forget what it was called already for some reason. But they stopped there, and Matt was able to find a way to get to the castle, get into Queen Morghast's garden, the same place that Rand accidentally fell in when watching Logan, the false dragon, in the first book, when the Aes Sedai were transporting her to, the palace in Caemlyn. So Matt intentionally falls into the garden, so to speak, and is actually able to deliver the letter. And there were some cool moments here between, when Matt is caught. First of all, it was kind of fun kind of seeing his character interactions. I liking how Matt's character is developing a little bit compared to the more snobbish kind of way that he was prior to, being disconnected from the dagger. Obviously, that was intentional character choice because it wasn't the real Matt there. But Matt does finally get his letter delivered, and also hears conspiracy of somebody who wants to harm, if not kill, Elaine, especially because of her ties to the White Tower. And we learn that this is actually Queen Morghast's new assistant, who has basically taken the place there instead of Elaida, as Elaida is, I think at this point in the story, still in the White Tower. So some interesting stuff going on there, and Matt is just like, okay, I guess I'm going to go that direction, because he hears from them that they're in Tyr, or they're going to Tyr, or whatever it is. I forget the specifics, but Matt's just like, okay, I guess I'm going to Tyr after them to save them, ? So he returns to Tom, and that's what they do. They immediately head towards Tyr. And the next time we see them is when they're arriving there, and we get, again, a lot more stuff with luck as well. When they arrive in Tyr, they find an inn, and it's just like, okay, well, here's our stuff. Let's go searching around and see if we can find them. So they go searching around in different inns, and part of the reason they're going around in different inns as well is because Matt is trying to find the henchman, somebody who's under the, orders of Queen Morghast's new assistant and potential lover figure, whatever he is to her. I don't know the specifics of, again. But Matt's chasing after the assistant's assistant, so to speak, and randomly happens upon him in an inn by, following his luck, which the mechanic of his luck has something to do with randomness, as Matt understands it anyway. It's kind of a fun and interesting, concept. It's a little bit cheesy and a little bit like, oh, okay, I'll grant you that one, but, it's fun and charming. Anyway, and there's some more gambling stuff as well, and they end up killing the guy in there, so that he can't find the girls and end up killing them, like Queen Morghast's assistant. I don't know why I don't remember his name, but I don't, wants them dead. Either way, that's what Matt does, is he kills the guy, and then it's just like, okay, well, now I have to find the girls somehow. So he returns to Tom, and that's what they spend doing for a little bit. So there's a little bit of a lull in their POV at this point. When they come back, Tom is developing a cough, and his cough has gotten so bad that he's just like sick. So Matt is like, okay, well, I need to find this guy, you know, some health somewhere. And somehow, I forget exactly how it is they come by it, but they come by the same wise woman that Nynaeve sniffed out as well. So they end up getting there, and when they get to this wise woman, her house, she's in a really dour mood, and it's because it's literally just been like a few hours or something since Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine were taken away from her to be, you know, imprisoned in the the Heart of the Stone. So many terms. This is only going to get worse as the series goes on, I'm sure. But then Matt and Tom are just like, okay, well, now let's get this information here. Tom is left with the wise woman so that he can, you know, like, heal, I guess, and recover from sickness. But Matt decides, okay, well, I guess I'm going to the Heart of the Stone. And he doesn't realize how much of a crazy person he sounds like when he says he's going to do that, but he decides to go do that anyway. And then the next time we see him, he is on his own over the rooftops of Tyr, you know, towards the Heart of the Stone, and he sees a lot of mysterious, shadowy people on the roofs, including some that basically get a jump on him, and they are the same Aiel as the girls met on their way to Tyr. So these characters were important. They do come back, so some of the same characters are here. And they decide it's just like, okay, well, you're not really that much of a threat or a danger, but, you know, we're here. And, you know, I guess I should bring up a couple elements that I haven't brought up to this point. The reason that the girls, or part of the reason that the girls were able to be captured in the first place was because of who they enlisted this guy. What is he? He's a I forget the term. He has some sort of profession that, you know, people hire him to search for stuff, essentially. So the girls basically hire him so that he will search for the Black Aja for them. And then the Black Aja managed to, you know, coerce him, essentially, potentially through magical means. It seems like it might be through magical means, to betray the girls and lead the Black Aja to them. So that's how they were captured, was because of this guy. But then this guy also finds the Aiel and Matt on the roofs near the Heart of the Stone, and he's just like, you know, I did this thing earlier today, and I'm not super proud of it, but you say that you're searching for them, actually, because Matt mentions it, or maybe he somehow instinctively knows who Matt is looking for, and she's like, I'm going to take you there. And again, earlier in the story, another thing that I forgot to mention was that in one of the towns that Matt and Tom stop in and in where they have to basically barter to be able to get a place to stay, and they end up staying in a stable there. And another girl who's part of, you know, one of the firework guilds, essentially, escapes from people who tried to kick her out and blame her for stuff that they did. You know, whatever the story is there, she has a bundle of fireworks that she essentially gives to Matt, and Matt, now in Tyr on these rooftops, uses those fireworks to blast away into, you know, the Heart of the Stone, essentially, into these hallways, so that whatever his face is, I don't remember his name. I'm not remembering a lot of names this time. I think it's the problem that I am doing this a few days after reading. To get into the Heart of Stone and then therefore find the girls. So that's where this storyline ends. Now they're in the Heart of the Stone. Now the girls are there in a prison cell, and Matt is there searching for them, essentially. The next storyline to talk about is a little bit to do with Perrin, and a lot of Perrin's storyline is also rather similar. It picks back up still trying to find what's his name, Rand. They're still following Rand to Tyr. So again, you can kind of see where this is going. Rand doesn't have basically any POV in this book. He has, oh man, it's not even a full chapter, I don't think. I don't even think he gets the full chapter near the end, but he gets maybe 1.5 chapters worth of POVs at most throughout the entirety of this book. But he is still the linchpin for everything else that happens, because everybody else, for one reason or another, you know, the girls are trying to get to Tyr because of the Black Aja, and the Black Aja are in Tyr because Rand, you know, Kalendor, and Moraine and Perrin are following Rand to Tyr, and Matt's following the girls to Tyr, so everybody's going to Tyr, and all this is centered around Rand in some way, shape, or form, whether that's by 1 degree or by 3 degrees, it doesn't matter, that's where they're going, and that's why. But so Perrin's storyline, I don't remember if I actually touched on this in the last last week, but let me double check. Yep, I did cover it last week. We did meet Fael, we did meet Zareen, and I'm probably just going to call her Zareen because I don't like the name Fael. It just doesn't roll off the tongue as well as Zareen does. This new character is one of the few reservations that I have about the series at this point. It's, to some small degree, a little bit of Perrin's character development is kind of bad character development, or going in a direction that I'm not sure how much I like because of Zareen and because of her character. Whether that's a good or a bad thing at the moment, I can't quite tell, but I think it's leaning towards bad, especially the way that a lot of people talk about these two characters in, say, books 7 through 10 or 11 or whatever. There's plenty of moments in like 8 and 9 that get a lot of grief because of these characters. It's halfway beside the point, but a lot of the storyline continues with this group of people still chasing after Rand, and I can't remember if it was in this week's reading or last week's reading when Zareen essentially decides, like, okay, well, I'm still searching for the horn. I'm going to continue to follow you guys, even though Moraine offers her a way out multiple times, until Perrin's big fat mouth decides to, spill the beans that Rand is the Dragon Reborn. So it's just like, okay, well, Zareen's part of the party now, and Moraine's not going to let her leave. And then one of them also mentions that Matt already blew the Horn of Valir, so not only is the horn already found, and Zareen's purpose as a hunter is useless because the horn's already been found, but it's already been blown. So, like, there's a lot of stuff to dig into there, but these characters are still heading towards Tyr, and that's what they're doing. And part of what happens in Tyr is is it actually in Tyr? I don't remember what inn it is specifically, but they do end up getting there. They do end up getting to Tyr, and they get an inn, and they discuss plans of how Lan and Moraine are going to get into the stone, or the heart of the stone. Probably for the same reasons that, the Black Aja are there, related to Rand and Kalendor. When there's a trap that had been set in their inn as well that knocks Zareen out, so far out that if she remains that way for too long, she's basically just gonna not have a soul left. So that was an interesting moment. The trap was meant for Moraine, but Zareen got caught in it, and then Perrin decides, okay, I'm gonna try to save her, and ends up, getting to her, and in dreams becomes, does more of this wolf dream stuff. Dreams are big thing in this book, and Perrin having wolf dreams is one of the things as well. One of these things that he's avoided meeting a lot of the book. He avoids sleeping, he avoids having deep sleep, so that he doesn't get to even REM sleep where he dreams and therefore has these wolf dreams. But he purposely does it so that it can save Zareen, and he kind of goes through the cycle of saving her multiple times until eventually, Tel'aran'rhiod. Crazy dream stuff. I don't know the full mechanics or how to explain a lot of it, but stuff happens. They eventually wake up, and then Perrin's just like, you know what? I actually have something else to do, and Perrin ends up joining the wolves in this dream, and he gets into the heart of the stone as well. That's one of the things that happens. So Perrin's also there in the dream world, I guess, for some reason. I forget where some of the payoff comes with that storyline, but eventually he does save Zareen in the dream world, and they kind of both wake up. I guess I don't fully remember off the top of my head, but that's kind of where the storyline was. So now Perrin was in the heart of the stone for a bit, and that's kind of where that storyline, where most of the important stuff with that storyline ends with the book, more or less. So a lot to look forward to, with heavy air quotes, with Perrin and Zareen in future books. We'll kind of see how that goes. Who knows? It could go either way, but the other two storylines that I've covered up to this point have been, the girls and Matt's. And one of the fun ththings that happens here is, Egwene's exploration with Tel'aran'rhiod. She induces herself into a dream purposely within the prison cell because the Black Aja didn't, take away the Terran Grial. I guess they didn't even know that she had it. So while they are in this prison cell, Egwene is able to use this and, effectively, what I mentioned earlier with, the Aes Sedai being able to control air and be able to basically pin a person in place so that they can't do anything because they're just stuck in like a block of solid air, essentially. That's what happens. Egwene transports herself to Tel'aran'rhiod and basically gets, at some form of revenge on a couple of the Black Aja who captured her, and Elaine and Nynaeve is just like, no, and then she sticks them in this block of air and then leaves. And so she tries to find the prison blocks from there, so that she can try to unlock the door from the outside. Essentially try to do that so that they can free themselves. So, you know, in this dream world, because things that happen in the dream world also happen in real life, though it's not necessarily the same, vice versa. So what Egwene is doing is trying to unlock the door and open the door in the dream world so that it will be that way in the real world. And when she comes to the prison block, she finds the Black Aja that is guarding the prison cell and stills her that same way, traps her in this block of air as well. But then she wakes up realizing, oh wait, I need her to open the door. How is this going to happen? And that's when Matt tromps through and finds the bound Aes Sedai. She's like, okay, this is kind of strange. And so he grabs basically the key from her and opens the door. It's just like, well, if this Aes Sedai is here, maybe they're guarding the girls, because that might be where they are, based off of what this guy who is escorting me through the compound told me. So he opens the prison cell and the girls are in fact there, and they all escape essentially. And that's what happens with these storylines. I thought it was really cool. I thought all that was really cool stuff. Being able to explore Egwene with her magic is fun. Nynaeve's, like I said, is a little bit Deus Ex Machina-esque to some degree, but Egwene's has been really fun to explore through the whole book. But with everything happening in Tyr as well, this is basically where stuff kind of comes to a point in the end as well. Yeah, because I believe the chapter, you know, more or less right after when this stuff happens, is chapter 55, which is just straight up called What is Written in Prophecy. And what happens at the very beginning of this is like, okay, Rand is now in the chamber with Kalendor, and he is about to claim Kalendor when we learn at some point, I didn't mention this, that one of the, you know, High Lords of Tyr is one of the Forsaken. So another one of the Forsaken besides Lanfear and the one from the first book, I forget who that one was, is free. And so, yeah, and that one is a High Lord, and this High Lord meets Rand in the chamber. Essentially, it's just like, claim Kalendor or do it, and part of it is a trap, because like they want Rand to be able to claim the sword, and then they want to kill him basically immediately so that the sword isn't necessarily bound to him. At least that's my understanding. If that's wrong, correct me, but that's kind of my understanding of what was going on there. And Rand battles with this guy and kills him, and then, you know, goes through a whole bunch of different stuff where there's a bunch of fighting between, you know, people in the Heart of the Stone and the Aiel, because the Aiel has made it in, and there's kind of this battle sequence here. And at the end of the chapter as well, Rand battles Beelzemon, who it turns out, I guess, is just kind of like a conduit for the Dark One, and isn't like the personification of the Dark One, because Rand kills Beelzemon but leaves a body behind, and the body is a body of a man, and the Dark One obviously still lives. Like, there's a heck of a lot more books left, and that obviously wasn't the last battle. The last battle was a 190 page chapter in the very last book, so obviously, like, this wasn't that. But Rand does defeat, you know, these two big forces of the dark, and having claimed Kalendor, officially proclaims himself to be the dragon. And this is a really great scene, because then you have everybody, you know, hailing him as the Dragon Reborn. Now there's no uncertainty here. Now there's no more of this, you know, rumors of Aes Sedai supporting a false dragon over at Tomon Head, because Rand is the Dragon Reborn. In prophecy, Kalendor can only be touched and claimed by the Dragon Reborn, the true Dragon Reborn. So Rand claims it and is able to touch it, is able to wield it, is able to use it. Obviously, he's the Dragon Reborn. So the people are now praising him. The Aiel call him, you know, the one who comes before, or something. That might be from a completely different book or series. Again, forgive me if I'm misremembering exactly what the Aiel call him in prophecy, but he's the same person. So this very prophetic figure now exists, and he's very much the Dragon Reborn, and this is going to have an effect through the rest of the series. Rand is no longer in hiding. He's no longer running to prove whether he is the Dragon Reborn or not, and that's really great moment in the book. And the last chapters basically just kind of wrap up on this thread. It's just like, okay, well, that wasn't actually the dark one you killed, so we still have a lot more to do, and a lot more, you know, that's going to go on. And clearly by the, you know, 11 or 12 books that are still remaining in the series, there's clearly still a lot to go. But I really liked the way that this wrapped up. I thought it was all really good. My rambling and stuff was even worse this week than it was last week, but I tried my best. I definitely understand now, having finished this book, why people consider this trilogy to be a trilogy within the Wheel of Time. These first three books with very minor restructuring. Like the very last chapter would have to be changed quite a bit, obviously, because it's basically setting up for the rest of the series. Just like, oh, that wasn't the dark one. Well, you have to cut out some stuff like that. But other than that one chapter, some relatively minor reworkings of stuff within the first 3 books could have been a decently satisfying trilogy on its own, and I think would have worked that way. So it's interesting that people consider them as that kind of an arc, because they definitely are, and I feel that way rather strongly, and I really enjoyed it. But my voice is hurting. I've been recording for 40 minutes. The background music I didn't even, consciously register has been out for the last 10 or 15 minutes, so who knows what I'm going to do with that. I had a great time with this. I finished a little early. I know this was very rambly. I had a lot to get through. It was 20 chapters that I read, so there was a lot. But because my voice hurts and I'm still kind of processing stuff, I need to record a review for this at some point soon, and I need to do the, trilogy, the first trilogy of Wheel of Time type of diary thing for next week as well, but that can wait a little bit too. Either way, if you've been enjoying my Wheel of Time diaries, I hope you have. But if you have, I'm grateful to everybody who's been sticking around for those and been listening to them and listening to me talk about stuff that I know nothing about, because that is basically what these are, and making stuff up essentially. Feels like I'm making stuff up half the time. I appreciate anybody who watched this. I hope you consider checking out my review, because I have some fairly interesting things to say about this, all things considered, including in the video that'll come out next week, talking about this in comparison to the first 2 books. I think it'll be fun. Might be a little bit of a shorter video, and it'd be nice for one of these to be a little bit shorter than a half hour after the last couple weeks. So we'll kind of see how that goes, but thank you guys for watching. My voice really hurts, so I'm going to disappear now, and see you guys in the next video.